My grandfather died on a Tuesday in February 2019. I know the exact day because I was the one who drove him to Providence Regional in Everett, and I was the one who sat in the waiting room for 6 hours, watching the same 4-minute weather loop on a mounted TV, while the Cascades got another 8 inches of snow. I have not sung since. I want to explain why. But to explain it right, I have to go backward. I have to go back to the summer I was 11, to a logging road above the Sauk River drainage, to a man who smelled like pine pitch and Folgers, and who knew things about this mountain range that no university has ever written down. And I have to go back further than that, to the men who came before him. Because this is not really a story about my grandfather. It is a story about what they woke up and what has been listening ever since. My grandfather's name was Erland Voss. He came to the Cascades from a Norwegian family that had settled outside Darrington in 1911, and he spent 43 years working timber between Granite Falls and the Upper Swiattle drainage. He was not a sentimental man. He did not tell ghost stories. He did not talk about God, but he talked about the songs. He called them Arbeidssanger, work songs. His father had learned them from the men who came over on the boats, the ones who hired on with the early outfits when the Pacific Northwest was still being opened up, when a man could disappear into these mountains for a full season and come out changed in ways he could not describe to his wife. The songs were not for entertainment. They were functional. You sang them to mark territory. You sang them to keep rhythm on the crosscut. You sang them, Erland said, so that the mountain knew you were working and not wandering. I thought it was folklore, old world superstition dressed up in flannel. I was wrong. The summer I was 11, my parents sent me up to Darrington for 6 weeks while my mother recovered from a surgery I was too young to fully understand. My grandfather picked me up at the Greyhound drop in Marysville, and we drove the rest of the way in his '88 F-250. Windows down, even though it was barely 60 degrees. The radio off. He did not make small talk. He asked me if I could carry a tune. I said I thought so. He nodded like I had passed a test and said nothing else for the rest of the drive. The first week, he put me to work. Brush clearing, mostly on a private parcel above the South Fork of the Sauk where he still contracted for selective cuts. I carried slash and dragged limbs and learned how to work a Pulaski without taking my own shin off. My grandfather worked beside me without complaint, without praise, in the particular silence of a man who has spent decades in his own head. On the 8th day, he started to teach me the songs. I keep coming back to that morning. The fog was still in the trees, the kind of low cloud that sits in the Cascade valleys until almost noon in July. We were working the upper end of the parcel, maybe 400 feet above the logging road, and my grandfather stopped in the middle of dragging a section of fur and just stood there. He was looking up the slope, into the old growth that the cut stopped before. He said, "Listen." I listened. I heard wind. I heard a raven somewhere. I heard the drip of condensation off the big cedars. He said, "You hear that low note? Under the wind." I didn't, or I thought I didn't, but the longer I stood still, the more I became aware of something at the edge of what my ears could actually do. Not a sound exactly, more like the absence of a specific sound, a hollow, a frequency that should have had something in it, and didn't. He started singing. The song had no melody I could describe to you now. It wasn't structured the way songs are structured. It moved more like a chant. And the words were Norwegian, some of them, and some of them were something older that I have never been able to identify. He sang it quietly, not performing it, not demonstrating it. He sang it the way you'd speak to someone standing just beside you. The hollow stopped. The raven stopped. And for about 4 seconds, the Cascades were absolutely silent in a way that I have never experienced before or since. Not the silence of an empty place, the silence of a full place that has just turned its attention toward you. Then he stopped singing. He went back to the log. And he said, "Now you." I should say here that I carry that moment with me differently now than I did at 11. At 11, I thought my grandfather was eccentric, that the silence was coincidence, that I was a kid in the woods doing what kids in the woods do, which is feel things that aren't there. I believed that for a long time. I believed it right up until February of 2019. He taught me 6 songs that summer. I'm not going to write them down here. I won't even write the first lines. What I will tell you is that each song had a specific function. One was for beginning work. One was for ending the day. One was for a death in the crew. One was for moving through old growth that hadn't been touched. One was for a man who had become lost. And one, the last one he taught me, the one he made me swear I would not sing without him present, was for something he never named directly. He said, That one is a conversation starter. I asked who you were starting the conversation with. He looked at me the same way he looked up that slope in the fog. He said, "Whatever's been here longer than the trees." I did not sing any of the songs after that summer. I went home when my mother was recovered. I grew up. I went to Bellingham for school, then south, then east, then back to the Pacific Northwest, because the Pacific Northwest doesn't let most people who grew up in it stay gone. I worked in land management for a while, then in trail crew for the Forest Service out of the Darrington Ranger District, which put me back in the Cascades almost every week from May through October. I saw my grandfather at Thanksgiving and Christmas, sometimes in summer. I never asked him about the songs again, and he never brought them up. The thing I keep returning to, the thing I did not understand until too late, is what he said to me the last time I visited him at his house. His memory was going, not gone, but going. Like a radio station you're driving away from, still mostly clear, but with long stretches of static in between. He was sitting in the kitchen, he was looking at something past the window, and he said with a clarity that was completely out of proportion to the rest of that afternoon, "You have to keep singing to it. If you stop, it starts looking." I thought he meant it generally. I thought he meant it the way old people talk about faith or routine, about the importance of keeping up some practice. I think now, he meant exactly what he said. He died 4 months later. He was the last man alive who knew all 6 songs. I had been trying to remember the exact order of the melody for the third one since the funeral. I can't get it right. This is the part that is hard to tell, because it requires me to say that things have been happening in the Cascades that I cannot explain. Not through my training, not through my tenure with the Forest Service, not through anything a reasonable person would put in a trip report. The first thing happened in the spring after the funeral. I was on trail crew doing early season assessment on the Whitechuck River Trail above Darrington, the stretch that runs up toward Glacier Peak. My crewmate that day was a woman named Corinne, who had worked that corridor for 8 years. We were doing blowdown documentation, moving slow, when Corinne stopped and held up a fist. "Trail crew hand signals are for wildlife. Bear, cougar, elk. You stop. You wait." I waited. She turned around, and her face was wrong. Not frightened exactly. More like she had heard something that needed to be categorized, and was having trouble with the category, she said. "You hear that?" I said. "No," she said. "It sounds like someone is trying to sing something." I heard it then, or I heard the attempt at it. It was coming from the old growth above the trail, above the drainage, from somewhere in a slope that no maintained path goes. It was close to the melody of the 4th song, the one for moving through untouched forest. But it was wrong. The intervals were wrong. The phrasing was wrong. It sounded like something that had heard the song many times and was reproducing it from memory. Without understanding what made it work, we documented our blowdown. We went back to the truck. Neither of us filed anything about it in the trip report. The second thing happened in August of the same year. I was solo, hiking out after an assessment on the Upper Mountain Loop Highway corridor, coming down the backside of a ridge as the light was going. I had about 40 minutes of daylight left and I was moving fast. And I came around a switchback and stopped. There were boot prints in the trail, fresh ones, headed up, into the ridge I had just come over, into country that dead ends in cliff bands and old growth with no maintained routes through it. Boot prints going in, none coming out. I stood there for a long time. Then I kept going down, because the light was going, and because I am a professional, and professionals do not stand on ridge trails in the dark waiting to see what made the boot prints. I got to my truck. I drove to Granite Falls. I sat in the parking lot of a Safeway for 45 minutes before I could make myself go into the store. I filed a welfare check request with the district. No missing persons matched. No one claimed the route. No one was ever found. The third thing is harder to tell, because it involves me doing something I should not have done. It was October, a Sunday. I was off duty, hiking alone on a trail in the Boulder River wilderness. The kind of day you do alone because you want the mountain to yourself. Old growth forest down in the valley bottom. Big cedar. Big fir. The understory, that thick carpeted green that looks like something from before the concept of time. I was thinking about my grandfather. I started to sing. Not the last song, not the conversation starter. I started with the first one, the one for beginning work. I sang it quietly, the way he had taught me, not performing it, just placing it in the air. I got the melody right. I could feel that I had it right, the same way you know when a key fits a lock before you've turned it. I sang all 6 songs in order, except the last. I stopped at 5. The forest was quiet. Then from up the drainage, maybe 300 meters, maybe less, something answered. I cannot describe it to you accurately because my brain will not hold the description. What I can tell you is that it was not an animal. It It was not the wind, it was structured. It rose and fell with intention. It had the shape of the songs without the content, the way a shadow has the shape of a person, without being a person. It was singing back. I walked out of the Boulder River Wilderness in 16 minutes. That trail takes 45 minutes normally. I do not remember the middle portion of that walk at all. I remember the trailhead parking lot, and I remember that my hands were shaking, and I remember that I sat in my truck for a long time before I could articulate, even to myself, what I was feeling. It was not fear, it was recognition. Whatever is in those mountains recognized my voice, and I think in the hollow way a person might recognize a face without being able to name it. I recognized something in what it sent back. My grandfather sang to it for 60 years. He kept it oriented. He gave it something to listen to and something to wait for. And then he died, and the singing stopped. And now it is looking. I have not gone back to the Boulder River drainage. I have transferred to a district that puts me in the southern Cascades most of the time. Lower elevation, different country. Whether that matters, I do not know. I tell myself the range is large. I tell myself what happened in the valley bottom was acoustics and grief and a tired mind. I have been trying for 3 years to reconstruct the melody of the last song, the conversation starter, the one he said I couldn't sing without him. I get parts of it right, and then it slips, the way dreams do when you reach for them. I think that is probably good. I think that as long as I can't remember all of it, I won't be tempted to finish it. The part that keeps me awake at night is not what I heard in the drainage. It is something smaller, something my grandfather said when he taught me that last song. On the final morning of that summer, the morning before my parents came to pick me up, he said. The others stopped. Every generation thinks it's superstition, so they stop. And each time they stop, it takes longer to calm back down. He looked at me the way he always looked at the old growth. He said, "We are the last family that still knows. If you forget these, it won't have anything to listen to anymore. It'll have to go looking for something else." Last month, a search and rescue team lost a volunteer on a night operation near the Sauk River drainage. A healthy, experienced man vanished between 2 GPS waypoints a quarter-mile apart. They found his pack. They found his headlamp. They did not find him. The news report said the area had been searched thoroughly. I pulled up the coordinates. They were 400 feet above the logging road, where my grandfather first made me listen. I still hear it sometimes. The answer that came up the drainage. I'll be washing dishes, or driving, or trying to sleep. And it's there, right at the edge of what my ears can do. It is still waiting for the rest of the song.